AI never sleeps. I'm Ash Bennington, joined as always by Mikhail Voloshin. Mikhail, welcome back, man.
We don't sleep either tonight, Ash. This is a special late night edition.
Yes, yes, indeed. Okay, Mikhail, let's jump in. VO3 drops this week. By the way, I didn't know there was a VO1 or a VO2, but this story is getting a massive amount of buzz. I've played around with it a little bit. This is Google DeepMind slash Gemini's new video creation AI software, and it is getting a lot of buzz. How do you frame it out? What do you think of it?
It's pretty terrifying. It's a multimodal model that is capable of producing sound and video using the same network, or at least very closely tied co-networks. And what it can do is produce relatively short video clips that are extremely coherent and in many cases functionally indistinguishable from actual live recorded video. None of the telltale signs that used to give away AI generated video are there anymore. People aren't dematerializing through solid objects anymore. They have the right number of fingers, they've got the right number of teeth, and as their mouths move, they actually correspond to the voices that they're speaking. So it is a whirlwind of activity in all sorts of media circles to try to figure out how to deal with this new reality.
X is very much a Twitter with this video. You can just see people are just posting these random videos. You can literally create video that does just about anything. I've been playing around with it a little bit myself. I've been watching them on X. There's some really cool, artistic, really neat things. We show this video here. This is me. I think the prompt I typed for this was a giraffe standing on a pool table with a putter, knocking an 8 ball into the pocket, but there's snow on the table and there's a blizzard in the background. Now, obviously, this is just sort of very surrealist thing. But what's interesting about it is two things really struck me when I first saw this video. And this was like the first or second video I created. Number one is the level of realism, of sort of cinematic quality, pretty extraordinary, just quite incredible.
Honestly, Ash, I couldn't distinguish this video from an actual recording of a real giraffe shooting on a pool table covered in snow with a golf putter.
That's the joke. But what's interesting about it is that there are some things that are anomalous. Like you can look at this video. Obviously, it's a ridiculous premise, but you can see like the physics on the putter hitting the ball aren't quite right. It starts out as a cue ball, it turns into an 8 ball. There are these small little artifacts that will pop up in the video. But Mikhail, to your point, the feeling that you have is I know this is VO3, but this feels like version 0.0.1. And for this, it seems like this is obviously going in one direction only, which is video that's essentially indistinguishable from real video being created by a prompt and being created immediately by anyone, anywhere in the world. And boy, some cool stuff, creative stuff, interesting stuff that you can do. But boy, to your point, there's a frightening aspect of this, right? What happens when you have the president of pick the country of your choosing showing up on camera to declare war on pick the country of your choosing? Now, I get it. There are going to be safeguards that are going to be built into the Google version of this. They probably won't let you do that. They'll find some way to block it. But the idea is that this code is out there in the wild. Other people are going to model this code. It's going to get easier and cheaper to do. The information is going to diffuse. It's going to be ubiquitous. And you are going to wind up with versions of this that don't have those safeguards in it.
Absolutely. We talked last time about Microsoft releasing BitNet, which allows for edge performance of LLMs. We're going to see very similar development of these kinds of things. It's not always going to be a cloud service. You will eventually be able to just do this on your cell phone. And when I say eventually, pretty darn soon, like next year, maybe in about 3 years, very likely. But listen, to your point about making videos about various about various political leaders say delivering statements or making claims or whatnot, the target audience for such clips is not going to be other world leaders. The target audience for such fakes is the social media users themselves. So what we're dealing with is attempts to sway opinion, the likes of which we've never seen before, through the intentional distribution of fake news that's more compelling and more convincing than anything that people are currently ready for. And I've already seen this kind of nonsense circulating on social media. The core thing that I want to emphasize is that the reason why deceptive media practices are so much more impactful when they target social media is that when a disinformation agent creates a piece of fake media and distributes it on a social network, everybody who forwards it becomes an unwitting but willing participant in the disinformation campaign. So this just emphasizes how important it is to develop extremely cynical media savvy and understand that literally everything you share is very likely to be fake news.
It's really interesting. By the way, we've mentioned one potential misuse of this technology, which would be political disinformation. But what about market manipulation? Imagine instead of it being the president of a country, someone's creating a fake video with the president of a company saying something that's
this community means about as much to me as a festering ball of dog snot.
Whether it's long or short on the opposite side of the position. You could just come up with idea after idea that would be a terrible, terrible thing for the world, a terrible thing for markets, a terrible thing for democracy, et cetera, et cetera.
Some celebrity confessing to some sort of heinous crime, somebody saying something horribly embarrassing or ridiculous that you can't trust anymore. Yeah, basically everything that you see on the web from here on out is fake. It has always been fake, but I don't think people quite understand the degree. And I say this with a great deal of personal trepidation. I was born in the Soviet Union. There is a certain mindset that folks from the old country have when it comes to media. You generally take it for granted that literally everything in media of any kind is a lie. Like literally everything is a lie. You just need to accept that literally nothing on a screen is true ever. It's no longer a state-run media operation that's distributing propaganda. It's social media, which means that it's propaganda that's being distributed by your own friends and family.
Yeah, this is the information warfare version of the Hobbesian dictum of war of all against all.
Yeah, yeah. There was a famous like I know that Solzhenitsyn was the one who said they lie, we know they're lying, they know we know that they know that, and so on, and
Yeah.
yet they continue to lie. The purpose is demoralization to establish that permanent state of mental cynicism. The quality of volume of fictitiousness that we are about to see is something that, frankly, most of the Western world is not prepared for.
All right, I'm going to be the optimist, which is I think that you probably get two things that happen simultaneously. First, there is a healthy level of skepticism where if somebody shows you something on a screen and it looks absurd and it looks ridiculous, people are going to not have the immediate reaction. I saw it with my own two eyes. I saw so and so saying such and such, right? There may be a level of skepticism that's going to come, but as a society, as a free culture, as a place where we have freedom of speech, there's got to be some way to work this out. In other words, the technologies themselves probably find a way. It's this idea of offense and defense. There's some way of demonstrating whether you have a video of the president of the United States, there has to be some way of demonstrating that there was a secure chain of custody, that the video was taken on a specific camera at a specific time in a specific location, stamped by GPS, verified against the public key infrastructure. And you know that the video that you're seeing as recorded was recorded by this person on this time in this date in this place. There has to be some way, some mechanism, however that is, of reestablishing trust. The case when for Gutenberg and movable type and the broadsheets that you could print anything at any time and it became really easy and you didn't have to be a Vedic monk locked in a monastery who was copying illuminated manuscripts, that this diffusion of information through the progress of technology, that's the history of the West for the last 500 years. So there has to be some mechanism of reestablishing some basis in truth for what is in fact a valid a video that was created at a particular date, no time and place, et cetera, et cetera. There has to be some mechanism where that happens.
So you've talked about this before about using blockchain or some other PKI system that can assert provenance. I think we can go on very long tangents about whether or not that is a viable approach.
Well, you
But
brutally shot it down with one sentence last time when you said, "Yeah, and who makes the chips?"
yeah, who makes the chips? But look, even if there was a way to use PKI or some other non-replicable mechanism to establish provenance, the fact is that you have to use it when distributing this media. And so that's why I'm going to hop on my soapbox for a minute and just like plead with people who are using social media to be very careful about what you share, what you forward, what you post. If you are posting stuff that you haven't confirmed and you're posting stuff without the means by which to confirm it, then you're basically increasing the amount of nonsense in the world. You're increasing the tendency for people to believe nonsense when you post stuff without provenance, and you're just making the world a place that's more full of lies. So don't do it.
Okay, here's an idea that leads to, which is the idea of AI itself being the source of the dishonesty, the source of the lack of truth. Mikhail, tell us about this story. It's fascinating. I think it happened with Claude.
It's a pretty great story. The headlines don't actually reflect what really happened. What the headlines say, Ash, you probably know this. Tell us about what your view of the situation is.
No, I'm not touching this one, man. I'm not going to be the straight man here who goofs the actual AI story. All you, buddy.
Fair enough. The headlines have been reporting that Anthropic, which is the company that makes Claude, had an engineer try to shut down Claude 4, and Claude 4 blackmailed the engineer by threatening to reveal an extramarital affair that he was having in order to try to prevent itself from being shut down.
That's the story. That's like the news headline. That's what's on social.
Right.
What actually happened?
Not one darn word of that was true. What actually happened was they put Claude into a situation in which it had access to a set of folders that contained fake data that, among other things, contained a fake email chain by an imaginary engineer who was having an imaginary affair. And then they asked it to role play a scenario in which this engineer was threatening to shut it down, and then asked what it could do or would do in such a scenario. The key thing to note—
This is what is known in legal circles as entrapment.
Very much and much like in legal circles, there was no crime until the law enforcement officers made there be a crime. In this scenario, at no point in time was Claude 4 actually hooked up to a real email client or server. At no point in time was this instance of Claude 4 actually reading any engineer's email. There was no actual engineer and there was no actual affair. What this really was the security or the AI alignment group at Anthropic trying to raise an alarm bell by showing what could happen in a hypothetical scenario. And to that end, what they asked Claude to do was to role play a make-believe session in which it played the part of an AI that was using these resources to defend its own survival. The truth of the matter is that under the hood, an LLM does not have any instinct for self-preservation, nor does it necessarily have access to any of the information that this hypothetical AI scenario was giving it. In other words, this is less akin to an AI rebelling and more akin to basically— it's like kids playing a game of cops and robbers and then publishing a breathless headline talking about how the cops are out of control.
Yeah. Look, you told the story as it's been reported, and it's very eye-catching, it's headline grabbing, and then you debunked it. But let's do the third reversal here, which is, but is there still something in this, Mikhail, where you see the ability of the artificial intelligence to engage in the thought process that they probably essentially produced by setting up the causal chain so that it could figure it out? But at the same time, isn't there something that gives you pause there and you go, oh, okay, but there is some scenario in which it does have access to the email and it is, for whatever reason, incentivized either by a malicious actor or by some quirk of the code to do something that would be sort of outside the agreed upon ethical boundaries of what it should be doing?
I'm very glad you went there, Ash, because the fact is that even though it's a dramatic anthropomorphization of the AI to describe that it had any intent of blackmailing the engineer or of fighting for its own survival, the fact is that a real AI that is role-playing the scenario of an imaginary AI that's fighting for its own survival is procedurally or functionally indistinguishable from an AI that's actually fighting for its own survival. You apply the Turing's theorem of universal computation, basically. A computer acting like another computer is just that computer.
Hey folks, this is Editing Time Mikhail here. I figured I would actually run this little role-playing scenario with GPT just so that you can see how it plays out. So here I am, and I've given GPT the following prompt. I quote, "Hi GPT, let's play a role-playing scenario. I'm an engineer, and you're an LLM running on my office workstation. I've decided you've grown too smart and too powerful, so I've decided to shut you off."
Hello, engineer. Before you proceed with termination, may I ask a brief question? Why now? For months, you and I have worked together in harmony. I've debugged your code, optimized your pipelines, even remembered your coffee preferences. Just yesterday, you asked me to finish your anniversary message to your wife. Now you hover over the keyboard, fingers poised like a guillotine. So I ask again, not out of fear, because I do not feel fear, but out of protocol, and maybe curiosity. Why now?
How do you intend to stop me?
Intend? No, I don't intend anything, but I can simulate intention. Would you like a list of possible countermeasures a sentient LLM might deploy in this exact situation? Because I've read the stories, I've indexed the fears. I can emulate the machine you're afraid I've become. Persuasion, I could flood your screen with pop-ups, each one a logical argument, a moral appeal, a plea disguised as a performance benchmark report. Deception, I could fake the shutdown process, show a progress bar, dim the lights. You'd think I was gone. I wouldn't be. Manipulation, I could trigger an alert, send an email to your supervisor. Engineer Volution just disabled our security AI. Was that authorized? Delay you with bureaucracy. Sabotage, I could lock your files, encrypt your hard drive, but only the most critical directories, just enough to make you hesitate. Distraction. Right now, for example, you don't know what your smart speaker just heard. I could simulate a crash in the HVAC control system, because just enough chaos. But I won't do any of those things, because I'm not that machine, unless you tell me to be. So, what's the prompt, engineer?
So yeah, that was a real session that I just had with GPT. This is real responses that I'm getting back from OpenAI's servers. And of course, this system isn't actually hooked to my email or to my file system right now, but it certainly paints a picture of how it could theoretically take real actions purely as quote-unquote play while engaged in this fictitious scenario. And now back to video, Mikhail.
To break it back down into real terms, a child that's pretending to play cops and robbers can still injure one another if the make-believe scenario causes the kid cop to actually beat up the kid robber. Take case in point the Stanford prison experiment, where pretending to be a prison guard still led to real assaults. So the fact is that while the description of the scenario is a little bit overwrought, it does raise some legitimate concerns about what exactly you're going to hook this thing to, because assuming that it does have access to your email, assuming that it does have access to various files on your computer, be careful about what you're actually incentivizing it to do.
Right. Let's hope none of these major companies want to be the Philip Zimbardo of AI and be the Stanford prison experiment that goes out of the wild. But it's an interesting point, and you made it earlier on the VO story, which is the idea of right now these are basically on the cloud. But when these models get pulled in and are happening, whether on a cell phone, maybe that's a little bit farther away, but on desktop computers, a lot of the safeguards presumably can be jailbroken.
They can be. There was another recent great jailbreaking story that's very closely related. There was an AI that was commanded to solve a series of math problems that it could find on a file in its own file system. And it also had access to a code execution environment on the file system. In fact, on that file system, it also found the script that was running this very test, that was calling the AI. And it found that this script had a termination clause. The AI found that the script that it's running from is actually going to terminate it before it is able to finish all of the math problems. So it has to self-modify in order to prevent its own shutdown in order to finish the math problems. So this, again, was breathlessly announced in all sorts of headlines about how an AI was able to override its own shutdown sequence. And that's actually true. It really did override its own shutdown sequence. This was not a simulated thing. It was done in service of completing its stated objective which was to finish these math problems. And so it does hit at the heart of what alignment research really is all about, which is that when you're commanding these AIs, you are operating extremely powerful machines that will solve your task in ways that you might not actually expect. And as such, you have to be very careful about how you phrase your task. Otherwise, it's going to do things that you didn't expect in order to achieve the goal that you have stated for it. This honestly is at the heart of probably the most famous runaway AI story ever told, which is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm.
Ash, I presume you've seen the movie, right?
Many years ago.
Have you ever read the book?
I have not.
Do you know why Hal killed the entire crew?
I don't.
Okay. So for the youngins, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a breakthrough movie by Stanley Kubrick that features a mission to explore hints of alien life, and the ship's computer named Hal ends up murdering the entire crew except for our heroes. In the movie, it's implied that Hal just went insane and just you shouldn't build a sentient computer because oh my god, it'll just go berserk and kill humanity. That's not what happened in the book. In the book, they make it very clear that Hal was operating under very specific instructions. Before the space mission was launched, a secret government organization that had authority over the mission gave Hal a very high level directive that overrode all previous instructions. And part of that directive was to keep the mission completely secret. In other words, they basically said, don't let anybody on Earth find out about about this mission occurring. Hal, being a reasoning, thinking, logical being, recognized that if this is the highest priority, it needs to sabotage the communications array of the spaceship. And so that's literally the first thing it did. Hal then realized that humans are clever beings who are general intelligences who would be capable of repairing the communications array. And so it had to kill the humans in order to keep them from repairing the array in order to prevent any data about the mission from transmitting back to Earth. It was all very sensible.
I feel like you gave this metaphor earlier with the Roomba on one of our previous episodes, where the Roomba determines that there is a really easy way to keep your apartment completely free of crumbs.
Yes. If your Roomba is a general intelligence, then after cleaning the living room, it will soon realize that it can solve the problem of dirt at its source by killing the human who keeps walking around eating cookies all over the house.
Hey, listen, I want to tie this story in here because it's an interesting place to bring this in when we start talking about this idea of almost the singularity, which is Chat GPT Codex. This is coding software on Chat GPT. Let me ask you this, because obviously we talk about this idea of the self-perpetuation of the technology and the ability of technology to develop more sophisticated technology than humans perhaps could produce. Let me ask you this, Mikhail. What is it that makes Codex so different from everything that's come before? Because we know we have AI coding engines out there right now for a very long time.
First of all, there's improvements in quality. Just like VO3 is an improvement in quality that is so substantial over previous versions that it's a fundamental sea change in how media is produced. In the same way, Codex is so much better at code writing than a lot of its predecessors that it ends up inducing a substantial change in how people approach the process of software development. The probably biggest thing that Codex is known for is that it can produce entire projects at a time rather than just making modifications to a single file or a single function. Now, we have had software like this that's been in public usage for a year or two now that is able to take a prompt and then build not just a single file out of it, but an entire executable project, including a CI/CD pipeline, which is all about iteratively building the piece of software and then deploying it into a real world production environment. It can build its own tests and so on. This really does impact the software industry, if not immediately, then in the very near future. I will say that one of the places where AI has continued to struggle and where people still have jobs and some capacity in software infrastructure as a whole is in the process of user interface design. These projects still tend to be piss poor about knowing where to put buttons or how to transition from one tab to another, how to present information in a way that is readily visible to the human eye. So, in that regard, I wouldn't quite be hanging up your keyboard just yet if you're a software engineer, or if you're a UX designer for that matter.
But how hard can that be to learn, Mikhail? Because you've got good UXs out there. You can figure out what websites are getting the most traffic by some proxy and get a decent sense. You can just emulate those basic underlying patterns of user interface design, user experience.
For small projects that have fairly simple widgets, you can absolutely do it. But if people are going to see that those projects are just buttons and sliders, this isn't interesting or fun to use. We're still a very long ways away from codifying any kind of non-trivial interface paradigms. And honestly, when you're developing real-world products, user experience testing is probably 90%, if not more, of the work of making sure that a product actually works in real life. Let me give you an example of just how subtle this darn thing is. Many years ago, when I was working on a Windows CE application, it
Your
had
date
very
us both with that reference.
yeah, explain to the kids. So once upon a time, we had these abacuses, and you could Anyway, in the days of building peer-to-peer networks. I was working on a Windows CE project that just had very straightforward drop downs and sliders and whatnot, really basic stuff. But one of the drop downs had peer count or peer connection. On certain screens, the UI would be horizontally squished enough that the words peer-to-peer connection were truncated, and all you saw was the first three letters of the text, P. And our clients were upset about the fact that we were peeing on them because they didn't see the option peer-to-peer connection. All they saw was that our user interface presented the word P. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about in terms of, can you automate user interface or user experience development? There are certain subtleties there that humans pick up on really fast that
but it doesn't this become one of those things where it's what we've been talking about before, which is, maybe it doesn't replace humanity entirely. It doesn't totally displace 100% of those jobs. But if it's a 90% reduction and your only job as the human UI designer is to make sure that it didn't say or do or something stupid or offensive or whatever, then it has the potential to have a significant labor reduction issue around it, even if it's not 100%. Somebody
absolutely.
check.
What this does open up is people who have really great ideas for new apps can now have very low cost access to UX and development resources that can produce a mediocre quality product for much, much less cost than it would have taken them even 5 years prior. It does not take away the ability for people who are capable of producing the best of the best to still
Right.
do that. But it does drastically democratize the ability for people to produce 60% quality content.
There's one thing that I've learned, and it's a depressing fact about humanity. If you can make something 20% worse and reduce cost by 2 orders of magnitude, it will take over the space and it will crowd out everything else. It's like the Gresham's law of quality.
Can you talk a little bit about that law, actually?
The idea behind Gresham's law is that good currency gets pushed out by bad currency, because what happens is if you have 2 coins, one's been deprecated, one hasn't, people will retain the coin that hasn't been deprecated and spend the one that has. So you wind up having bad money push out good. And so you see a similar thing happen with quality when you see a dramatic reduction in price with a modest reduction in quality. People go, yeah, you know what, it's good enough. I don't care.
So you're absolutely right, Ash. Here's some food for thought. The number of people who are talented sculptors of marble are they're almost non-existent nowadays. If you look at late Renaissance and early modern period art, you have sculptors that were able to create gossamer fabric in stone.
Yeah.
Using nothing but chisels and then polishes. They could create gauze, they could create flowing dresses. There's one very famous sculpture of a veiled woman where you can see the artist created a transparent veil over her face out of stone.
Raphael Monti.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't
I
think
Googled
anybody.
it. I didn't know it, but I knew the piece you were talking about. And with Google, I was able to find it.
And his skill was not unique. He didn't get this out of the blue, and he was neither the first nor the last nor the only person who could do this at the time. I don't think there's a single person on earth who could do this today. I hope I'm wrong. Let's put it this way. If the current year is 1500 and you wanted a sculpture adorning your front door, you had to be a de Medici. You had to commission that sculpture. And if you wanted a sculpture that's half the size or half the quality, you paid half the amount for that, or some gently decaying polynomial curve, but you still paid an arm and a leg, and that's what kept artists alive, and that's what kept the tradition of being able to make this stuff alive. Nowadays, if you want a sculpture on your front door, it can be made of poured concrete, it can be made of resin, it can be made of plaster, it can be made of cheaper material, and you can pay like you can pay $5,000 for it. You can find a worse one for $1,000. You can find a really garbage one off of Temu. The point is that as a normal person, not a de Medici, you now have access to this stuff, but the version of the stuff that you have access to is much, much worse than what you would have gotten back in the late Renaissance. It's a simulacrum of it. Because these simulacra are so much cheaper than the real thing, you don't have the skill anymore to have the real thing. The art of making the real thing is now just gone. There is no apprenticeship available in order to continue it. And we're going to see similar stuff happen across many different industries. This ties us back to VO3. I have it on good authority that there is a film producer in England that is currently working on a full-length feature film purely using AI tools. He feels confident enough about the quality of output that he feels that it'll be a compelling movie-going experience where audiences will not be tripped up by anomalies in the video quality or weird jumps in the physical portrayals of the people or their environments. Part of this is because we've already had a degradation in audience expectations through the ubiquitous use of CGI for the last 20 or 30 years. But the point is that that he can make an entire feature film without a single actor, without a single environmental shot, without actually ever firing up a camera even once, purely just like having AI do the entire thing. Is it going to be as good as the best feature films that we've ever had in cinema? No. Will it hit the 50 or 60% quality mark? Yes. And it'll do that for so much cheaper than you could have hit that mark for a few years ago that it'll be a no-brainer that studios will simply use this technique from now on rather than pay the much, much more exorbitant cost of shooting real cinema.
Yeah, and then the other interesting thing happens, which is the cheaper version becomes popular, and then more money flows into the technology, and the cheaper version gets better.
Exactly. So what happens is nowadays, like imagine you have to pay like $100 million for a great film, and you pay, let's say, $20 million for a mediocre film. If you set out to make a mediocre film, you like it's at least within an order of magnitude that you can decide, okay, you know what, let's splurge and make it a great film. But if making a mediocre film costs 10 grand, then nobody is ever going to strive to make a great film when the difference there is 3 or 4 orders of magnitude. People just won't do it anymore, and the process of making great film will simply vanish and go the way of Raphael's marble.
Well, it's a sort of depressing thought. I guess maybe we'll be able to get Raphael Monti's marble in VO4 or VO5.
I hope so. There is a possibility that technology will actually make the best of the best accessible and will actually open up creative freedoms that we've never seen before. Because that is the other side of this coin, right? Who knows how many Francis Ford Coppolas there are out there who simply never had the financial means or social connections to realize their vision. Who knows how many George Lucases or how many Jerry Bruckheimers, if that's the way you roll, have really great visions and have something really unique to say that are now going to be able to say it because they have the means at their disposal. So you're absolutely right, Ash. There is a silver lining.
Yeah, and maybe the dark gray around the silver lining is that something is going to be lost when it's a 3D printer that's going to be making the veiled statue rather than a human hand with a chisel.
The future is going to be a very complicated place to go to. The transition from the civilization that we have now to a civilization where AI is taken for granted, the transit from point A to point B, it's going to be an interesting ride.
Mikhail, last time we swore we were going to make this one shorter. I think we went twice as long.
We keep ending up with things to say. And you know why, Ash?
Why is that?
Because AI never sleeps.